So, and thanks, Ms. Chakowski, for a rapid round of quote unquote final revisions. So we just have one section of language to look at together. Is that correct?
Yes, and I haven't sent it to Jude yet because I figured we should just look at it together to make sure I actually captured it.
Okay.
So when we last spoke, this committee was discussing the language in the appropriation section related to the community action agencies and funding new positions for coaches and coordinator. So I don't normally draft appropriation, so I wanted to make sure that I actually captured it. So 1.5 million to the community action agencies to be used through fiscal year 2025. Is that?
No, till December of 24. That's when the ARPA funds are. And I think used through it would be fine.
And then I did add Office of Economic Opportunity here. So December 31st, 2024 is the right number, the date.
I think Senator Westman, your mic was off. I think you said yes.
I said yes. It's December, the end of December 2020.
Okay.
So.
And the coordinators in the Office of OEO. Okay.
So I have one small thing that I went in rereading it. So in the intro language of this section, previously it said in fiscal year 2022, there's appropriated from the general fund, but it sounds as though you don't want the money to come from the general fund. So I struck reference to the general fund here. Senator Westman, you're muted if you're talking to me.
I'm pretty clear this is going to be ARPA funds,
Okay.
but it will, that will be something that the Appropriations Committee makes a final decision on.
Okay.
So how should we send it with no source name, or just stick general fund in and acknowledge?
I think if you said ARPA funds, that would be fine, but that's the magic that appropriations will do.
Right. All right. So knowing that this is all subject to their revision anyway, and we're entirely amenable to however they get there, I think being silent on it will be great. Okay. Thank you for that. All right. So any other thoughts on that one? Sounds like we're all set. Great. If you can finalize that and send it to Jude and send me a copy directly, then I'll transmit that down to Probes and we'll get to visit with them next week. Thank you everyone for that. And it's exactly 11 o'clock on the dot, so we're right back on schedule. Thanks, Ms. Chakowski, for jumping in. Now we're turning to a visit with Commissioner Lewis Porter. Good morning, Mr. Commissioner. And I know you've brought along, this is dial a friend, phone a friend, Mr. Gomez. So we're interested, we've been doing this with your other A&R commissioner colleagues, as well as TJ Poor of Department of Public Service. We're saying, okay, so we have this once in a lifetime, 1, 3, 5 year opportunity to spend and invest in things in Vermont that we haven't seen happen before. How are you working your way through that, and what are your priorities? Go from there. So the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Lewis Porter, Commissioner of the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I have with me Steve Gomez, who's our budget and license office head. So we have somebody who knows what they're talking about with us. I need to give you a warning up front. In my last testimony this morning before Senate Economic Development, my internet went out. And so if I disappear, I will happily leave you in the hands of Steve Gomez until I can get down to our local general store and get back online. Just wanted to give you a warning that may happen.
I'm sure Steve can handle it.
I think you might be better off just if I just turn my camera and microphone off right now.
Right. Well, that's a very Zoom 2021 story. You have to go down to the general store to connect to the rest of the meeting.
Exactly. So what I thought I would do is just give the committee a brief history of, or a brief reminder of how we've spent other federal money that we've gotten in the last couple of years, including EPA wetland money and CARES Act money. And then, because I think that informs our approach to the potential rescue plan money and how we will go about using it, if that works for you.
Sure.
So we've been lucky enough to receive a couple $1 million in each of the last couple of fiscal years through the EPA, really thanks to Senator Leahy. That money purpose of that money is to reduce phosphorus pollution of Lake Champlain. And we have been lucky enough to be the recipient of that money. And the way we've used it is to purchase and restore marginal farmland along rivers and streams in the Lake Champlain Basin and restore that land to wetlands. And that obviously has a pretty significant nutrient benefit in terms of protecting Lake Champlain water quality. It also provides for public access and recreation to those lands. And so that has been a major effort, a major project for us. We have purchased about 2,500 acres so far and plan on restoring at least 60% of that land to wetlands. In addition, we received about $1.8 million in CARES Act funding for public access to land and water. And we put that money out last year, I think very successfully in improving access to land and water that is owned or managed by the Fish and Wildlife Department. So we've done improvements to access areas and parking areas to reach access areas. We've done docks that are ADA accessible. We have added some places, some ways for people to access our land and water. We've done programs like new parking lots, repaving roads, making that infrastructure, that wildlife related infrastructure available to the public, more available to the public and more available to more different types of members of the public. And I say all of this because I would say that our goal, our approach to this additional money has been that we use our regular money, by which I mean all of the normal sources of revenue that we have, from capital bill to fishing and hunting license money, to maintain our current infrastructure and accessibility. And we use these additional monies to improve that access in ways that we wouldn't be able to do with the normal money. And when I say improve, I mean both improve it to Vermonters that have not had a history of being served by the access to wildlands and wildlife as much, and improving the access at individual sites. So ADA docks and so on. And so our goal with the potential ARPA money would be to do that same thing and to put this amount of this money, and I'm using for my planning purposes $2 million a year, 2.25 million a year, as kind of the amount that not that I expect, but that I think is realistically potential out of and it would come through the ACCD economic development and recovery portion of the ARPA money. The reason that it's appropriate to use that economic recovery and improvement money for these purposes is that outdoor recreation in general and fish and wildlife type outdoor recreation in particular is a huge driver of the economy in Vermont. The 2019 Department of Commerce study found that Vermont was the fourth highest state in terms of the amount of total economic activity that comes from outdoor recreation, and that hunting, shooting, sports are the second highest category among those outdoor recreation activities, second only to snow sports. And so this is a big economic engine for the state. Even perhaps more important, it's economic activity that happens primarily in or often in rural parts of the state that have historically struggled economically. It goes disproportionately to small businesses in those parts of the state, and it's really spread out and dispersed across the landscape in Vermont. It's not concentrated in a few big businesses or a few small sections of the state. It really is spread out around Vermont. So,
a quick question.
yes, absolutely.
The 2.25, is that 2.25 times 3 years?
That's what we're sort of planning on and sort of anticipating, but there are a lot of things that will go into that. Most importantly, legislative decisions, and the exact amount I think is important. But what's more important is the what we'll do with it and why we think that this is an important part of the economic recovery. But that's sort of my plan at this point, knowing that there are a lot of things in the administration and in the legislature and on the ground that may have an influence on that, especially legislative action and Treasury, U.S. Treasury guidance. We have a pretty good sense for what we can use that money for, but it's not a rock solid guidance from the Treasury at this point.
Sure. I know it's very early days on the still is yet to be formally, I think he maybe even introduced, no less passed, infrastructure bill, which I guess we won't likely see till something like October. But there has been a fair amount of, reporting on it and stuff like that. Have you seen anything in there that suggests that Fish and Wildlife will be eligible for monies out of that infrastructure bill?
So President Biden has set a 30 by 30 goal, 30% of the land and water conserved by 2030. And I think the infrastructure bill, if it were to come to fruition, that initiative would probably inform that bill to some extent, to a large extent. Obviously, as a major player in the world of land and water conservation in Vermont, we could stand to be the tool for getting some of that money out. I mentioned that wetland program. We're the largest owner of wetlands in the state of Vermont now. And so we would anticipate, or well, not anticipate, we would hope to benefit and to put some of that money to use. I have to say that, and I'm only reading the newspapers on this, but I have to say that I'm leery about counting on the infrastructure bill at this point.
Okay.
So I'm looking at the ARPA funding as a standalone and discrete piece of money that we should use in the best way that we can, whether the infrastructure bill does come to pass or not.
Okay, right. I mean, I am hearing similar things, cautionary things, that the politics around things like the filibuster, for instance, may, and whether reconciliation is a suitable method for advancing the bill, may tangle up some good ideas, may get stuck on parliamentary procedure. So
if it was up to Vermont's congressional delegation, I have no doubt that it would pass. But it's not all up to them. So,
right.
Yeah. Yep. So to get to a little bit more specifics about the types of projects that we want to do, we have a very good track record in history of getting access to wildlife and wildlands in the more rural parts of Vermont. By both because I think it's the future of our department, but also because I think that we have an obligation to serve all Vermonters. I'm interested in using this money, at least in part, to try to achieve greater access to those resources for places and people who have not had as easy access to it. And so the reason I mentioned the wetland money at the beginning of this conversation was that we are acquiring, have already and are planning on acquiring more land on the lower Winooski. And that is uniquely well situated to provide wildlife and wildland access to the urban areas of Chittenden County, within public transit, bicycling, and walking distance. And so that's one thing I want to do. In addition, our access to lakes and ponds in Vermont is pretty much the envy of many states. There's hardly a pond that is usable for boats or canoes or kayaks that we don't have access to, which is great. But our access to rivers and streams is not as strong. And I want to and will improve our access to rivers and streams for paddlers, bird watchers, also anglers and hunters. And so I think that is a place to concentrate some of this money, particularly on certain watersheds, including the Otter Creek, the Winooski, the Missisquoi, to improve that access. We have done a lot in some parts of the state, but we have not reached the level of access to those waterways that we have for lakes and ponds. So I'll stop talking there. I've talked for a long time. I'm most eager to have a conversation with you, so I will stop talking there.
Well, thank you. That's helpful to hear some big picture projects, and you may have already been contacted. There's an effort that I don't know, it didn't get all the way to fruition, but it was just below the falls in Middlebury to have a boat livery and access point. And then there's a pretty placid, because there's a small hydro dam downstream, maybe not even a mile. It's sort of like a big, slow moving pond. Well, not that slow some days. Anyway, people have talked about, boating right in downtown Middlebury. So we'll see. There could be some opportunities, and in lots of places. Thanks for that one.
Yep.
We'll follow up.
And as you know well, the wetlands and swamps upstream of Middlebury on the Otter Creek, some of which we're proud to own, had a major impact in preventing more flood damage along Otter Creek. And so I think recreational access to those areas is coupled with those other environmental benefits is important.
Yep. So you mentioned the lower Winooski. Is that floodplain that you would acquire?
It's floodplain, riparian corridors, and wetlands. And we have the Intervale Wildlife Management Area already exists. We are acquiring some other marginal farmland nearby. And I think that a partnership with some of the other entities in the area, including the Intervale itself, I think has some real promise.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm just curious, what's the working relationship when you're looking at riparian lands adjacent that are currently part of a farm? Who does one agency or the other take the lead? Do you go first, or does ag go first, or do you consult back and forth and basically have a prioritized list of places that are maybe most vulnerable to erosion, that are sort of the most promising candidates for taking out of crop production, that kind of thing?
It's a mixture. So this money that we're getting actually comes from EPA to the Basin Program, I believe, then to DEC, and then to us, which might seem like a convoluted process, but in fact, it sets up a partnership where we work with Department of Environmental Conservation. We work very closely with the NRCS, the National Resource Conservation, and with the Agency of Ag to identify places where the sediment and nutrient loads are high and where the value of the land for farming is low. ultimately the farmer's the most important partner because it's a willing seller, willing buyer arrangement. So the farmer has to be in the economic best interest of the farmer as well to sell that land. It's made a little bit more attractive to them by the fact that often these are farmlands which are flooded, inundated either annually or in many years. And so it's less worth less to them as farmland.
Senator McDonald's always reminding us to go upstream to do the work, stop the problem before it really gets going. Can you talk about the other end of things, headwaters, or maybe not quite headwaters, but upstream?
Absolutely. So a disproportionate share of the land we own is in headwater areas. So higher elevation woodlands. And so we do have a lot of ownership there. We also engage obviously with Act 250 and Section 248, a lot of which is about protecting riparian areas, including those areas up in the watershed more. So that is an important part of what we do. I will say the lower reaches are important also because of the amount of nutrients and because of the proximity that they are to the lake. They can be a significant contributor as well.
Sure. And if any of us are thinking about places we know that seem ripe for conservation, I'm guessing that, major land purchases like 100 acres and up, that kind of thing. That's probably a long, slow conversation to get to the point of closing a deal. Who do people who are interested in approaching projects like that, do they come to you? They go, Nature Conservancy, could be either way. What do you have? What kind of recommendations do you have for people who are interested in that work?
We have a big patchwork of organizations doing similar but not exactly the same work. The good thing is that all of us refer projects to each other. And so I think any of those entities, whether it's TNC or us or VHCB or land trusts, either the state land trust, the Vermont Land Trust, or the local land trust, will all send projects that are most appropriate for the mission of different organizations to those organizations. We're a good place to start because we have a lot of those relationships and do that a lot. But there's, the projects that the Vermont Rivers Conservancy does are similar but slightly different than the projects we do. And so we work together to make sure that the right project's going to the right entity. And oftentimes it'll be a combination of entities that do a project. So we do a lot of projects with using VHCB money as part of the funding. And then say the Vermont Land Trust might hold an easement on that portion of the project. So it's a complicated set of relationships, but the good thing is that it's a very functional set of relationships. So we can get people to the right place. Sometimes those projects do take a long time and are, many years in the making. I have to say that I've been very encouraged and happy by the speed with which some of the projects that we've done with this wetland money have happened. I mean, we've only been doing this for a couple of years, and I think we've done something like 14 or 12 projects already. So I'm impressed and happy with the speed at which some of those have come together.
Okay, great. Well, I just want to pause and look at the rest of the committee and see if others have questions for you while you're visiting with us. Senator Westman, you're looking this way. All right.
I've been listening, even to Lewis.
What are friends for?
Exactly.
Okay. Well, great. Well, one more question on major land acquisitions, like large stuff. There's a project I'd love to talk to you about, and maybe Commissioner Snyder as well. And I don't know how big it is, but it's, I think, multiple hundreds of acres. Do those usually require, that would be a lot of money behind a project like that. So what's the funding stream look like that? Are you assembling things like perhaps a federal grant plus some state money plus private money, or how does that work generally?
Yeah, exactly. So we have a number of different sources. We use Pittman Robertson funding, which is excise taxes on sporting goods and ammunition. We have this wetland money that I mentioned. We have the Habitat Stamp, which is our voluntary donation program, which is supported in large part by hunters and anglers, which often is small dollar amounts, but crucial funding to get some of these projects done. We also have, everything from local community organizational efforts and donations to donations through VHCB, as I mentioned, or other granting organizations. So there's a whole set, and I'm sure I'm missing some. There's a whole set of funding sources that we bring to bear on a project. And it depends a lot on the purpose of the project and the type of acquisition it is.
Great. Yeah, you were educating us on the Habitat Stamp last year ago.
Yep.
There's one on my car. So.
Thank you. Appreciate the donation. Thank you.
Happy to pitch in once I knew that I'd only vaguely heard of the program, so I was glad to be part of it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for the visit. Unless there are any other committee questions, we will wrap up for today. And floor is at 11:30. It's 11:22, so we have a little break till we hit the floor. Okay. Thank you, committee, and see you on the floor. Have a great weekend. I'm not so sure the weather's going to cooperate, but it's still a weekend. Okay.